There we go. So, John Dotson is next. He's going to introduce himself, but his title of his presentation is Behold the Spirit, Time Traveling with Alan Watts in the 21st Century.
Music created my necklace. I'm the clerk of the vestry of St. James Episcopal Church in Monterey, California. I think Alan Watts would love it, and I would come with a gift. My bracelet from Calcutta, a bracelet from the Kogi people of South America. Lisa provided me. First of all, to the Arapaho, the people who were here. That's what Arapaho Avenue means. Generations now living are witnessing magnitudes of change, of scale and dimensions, a spiritual transformation without precedent in human experience. That prophecy arrived on a bright afternoon beside Lake Michigan in early 1970, my sophomore year in college. Soon thereafter, I discovered John Gibson. So it is 48 years later, Word made flesh, changing world in flames, urgent changes are needed. Now is the day. I wake up from my dreams, I take on my demons, say my prayers, listen to the warblers, jays, and crows, the lovely hawk and the tall pines, aurora consurgence, dawn arising. I get up, make my coffee, fire up my MacBook, engage the global energy fields that electromagnetize our minds. I take in the first hits, spectro-poetic entertainments, truths far stranger than fiction, consolidations of power, pseudologia fantastica, which means pathological lying, as Dr. Jung. The ongoing and highly successful psycho-cyber warfare operations that permeate our homes and our heads. Mass psychopathology, I reckon. My anxieties intensify as I find my most deepest intimacies are in fact entangled with this winner-take-all geopolitics. My personal decision-making processes meld with the unspeakable horrors. Wherever I look, I see the money god, I see angels of wrath, I see angels of mercy. In 1962, in this book, Gibson writes, anxiety is an element of life, and thus it is just as unlimited and unfathomable as life itself. Every anxiety-filled situation demands of us a decision. Gibson, every decision requires readiness for responsibility. Whenever people unite in the service of a higher unity, anxiety gives way through pure devotion and unselfish prayer. John Gibson. Pure devotion and unselfish prayer. Then, together, as we are here at Naropa University in October 2018, we need one another. Let us wear together, trusting the process ever more radically, ever presently, in the fullness of our doings and our yieldings. I believe this term can be serviceable from Gibson. Preligio. Gibson. Preligio is a commitment to the emergent transparency of the presence of origin. The prolegio does not exclude any of the other forms or ties of commitment. Rather, it integrates them into the whole. Emergent transparency and transparent emergency. Gaither says, the grand and painful path of consciousness emergence, the unfolding and intensification of consciousness, manifests itself as an increasingly intense luminescence of the spiritual in humankind. Deep breath. Let's trace some temporals. My name is John Calvin Dotson III. I was born in the city of Kingsport in northeastern Tennessee. We share a hometown with this band, who I have not seen in about 50 years. A little more than 50 years. I was born in midsummer, middle of the 20th century, 1950. That natal ground was sacred to the Selagi. Cheerio. Evidence suggests human habitation on the banks of the Holston River through many millennia. The Appalachians are very old, and I have stories that are as old as the hills. The Appalachians are older than the Himalayas, older than the Rockies by far. My stories, I can trace my ancestry to the Flatboat days. My blood is Irish, German, Scots-Irish most likely, but I was also born into a church family, Oak Grove Baptist Church, founded in 1869, just 4 years after Lee surrendered at Appomattox. If I were a powerful film director, I would love to transport you cinesthetically to the post-war 1950s when Oak Grove was still a small down-home church in a grove of oaks. What I could not convey in the film is the lily of the valley fragrance, the magic of Avon that merged with hellfire and damnation. 10,000 sermons, or so it seemed. In the summers, at the evening service, the windows open, a night train would whistle and rumble out of the Southwest Virginia coal fields, clickety-clacking through Sawmill Hollow. A visiting preacher could get caught not knowing whether to take a breather and lose rhythm or forge full steam ahead to the invitation hymn. There was a sweet spirit in that place. To this day, 19th century hymns, revival hymns, swirl through my mind continually. I was baptized by full immersion in that baptistry. Don't know what a baptistry is? I'll explain it later. 6 years old, and I soon proclaimed I was going to be a preacher. Let's date that in 1958. I was very earnest. Next to my Bible, I packed treasured paperbacks, The Golden Book of the Weather, and Frontiers of Astronomy by Fred Hoyle. In time, my curiosities grew into diverse speculations and doubts. With adolescence, I discovered philosophy. I railed inwardly, at least, against religious hypocrisy. I came to dread Sunday mornings. A near-death experience at age 16 changed everything and deeply intensified my commitment to honesty, honestly sought. That motto eventually led me to my fate at Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois, and a major in phenomenology, psychology, and communications theory. It was in Evanston that I first saw the name Alan Watts in the university bookstore. Maybe it was the joyous cosmology that caught my attention. Perhaps the foremost interpreter of Eastern disciplines for the contemporary West. LA Times. I read Watts' book, and I was immediately attracted to his respectful deconstructions of Christian dogma. The structures of consciousness, Georg Feuerstein refers to Gebser and Jung as cosmopolitan Christians. And maybe that fits Alan Watts also. I felt like he was saying everything that needed to be said and everything that I could possibly want to say. His writing stands up well to this day. He's very much in print. Alan Watts was born in a suburb of London in 1915, the second year of the war to end all wars. He was 15 years old in 1930 when Jung wrote, "The insights of the East have no meaning when we close our minds to our own problems, when we veil ourselves and our real human nature with all its dangerous undercurrents and darkness." Carl Jung. So let's do some time traveling now, tripping through the temporics. A little bit, I'll keep this cadence going here, gotta keep it going. 1932, the atom is split in a cyclotron. 1934, Adolf Hitler commissions Leni Riefenstahl to produce Triumph of the Will. 1937, Mao Zedong and the Red Army complete the 6,000-mile-long march. 1938, the Holocaust begins with Kristallnacht. 1939, Trungpa is born in Tibet. 1941, Goering authorizes a total solution of the Jewish problem. 1942, with the launch of a V2 at Peenemünde, the rocket space age begins. Jewish slaves in caves assemble the space vessels. Watts immigrates from the UK to the USA, turning 30. In 1945, an atomic device is tested in New Mexico, Day of Trinity. Little Boy destroys Hiroshima on August 6th. 3 days later, Big Boy ignites over Nagasaki. World War II ends with 54.8 million dead. How do we calculate such numbers? In 1945, Arthur C. Clarke imagines communication satellites. In 1947, with this book, Watts earns his master's at Seabury Western Theological Seminary in Evanston. And he writes in this book, philosophers and historians have been saying for years that the Western world is in a period of acute crisis, the end of a phase of our civilization, if not the end of that civilization itself. 1947. Now an Episcopal priest, Father Watts takes up the chaplaincy at Northwestern until in scandal, having fallen in love with an undergraduate, he resigns in 1950. This is from his resignation letter. "We are living in a time of disintegration, which the Hindus call Kali Yuga. It hurts and frightens us, but it is not essentially evil. It is rather a universal passion in which man cries, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, my God, why have you forsaken me?" The Spirit uses forms and reveals itself through them, that they are not exempt from the simplest law of life, that like every other living thing, to grasp them, the forms, is to strangle and kill them. That resignation accepted by his bishop, Watts then responded, "I know that I am a priest forever, and I have no thought whatever of going back to the former state." Watts then writes The Wisdom of Insecurity, defining, quote, the very collapse of the beliefs in which we have sought security, unquote, and concluding, to be at this moment is pure miracle. In ways that differ but little, this is the last word of Western and Eastern wisdom alike. To be is a miracle. Alan Watts. 1950, Truman approves production of the hydrogen bomb. The Korean War begins. In Switzerland, Gebser completes Earthsprung and Gegenwart. Mutilated that pronunciation. The first transcontinental television program is broadcast. 1952, Gebser writes, "Only rational thought is anti-religious. Irrational thought, by reason of its transparency, will enter into a new and intensified relationship to religion." The US explodes a hydrogen bomb. 1953, Russia builds a hydrogen bomb. Watson and Crick unveiled the double helix model. IBM markets a computer. Entering his 40s, Alan Watts goes to California and works with the American Academy of Asian Studies, co-founding that, which later morphs into CIIS. 1955, in the Phenomenon of Man, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, S.J., is published. That book is published posthumously, and Disneyland opens. In 1956, Elvis Presley scores a hit with Heartbreak Hotel. After Gone with the Wind, Cecil B. DeMille's The Ten Commandments, the second most popular film ever made. 1957, Russia launches Sputnik. Some of us remember these things. 1958, reacting to Sputnik, President Eisenhower creates the Advanced Research Project Agency, ARPA, leading to the ARPANET, which will morph into the internet. Alan Watson this year, 1958, visits Jung at his home in Kusnacht. In Sawmill Holler, I am working through my calling to full-time Christian service. 1959, 20-year-old Trungpa completes the 9-month trek of his exile from Tibet. During the Great Chinese Famine from 1959 to 1961, deaths by starvation totaled tens of millions. In 1960, computerizing meteorological data, Edward Lorenz discovers sensitivity to initial conditions, a property of chaotic systems. This leads later to the discovery of attractor behavior. In 1961, Yuri Gagarin was the first human being to travel in space. 1960, Carl Jung dies. 1962, Telstar conveys lives for the very first time from Europe to America. I remember, it was fabulous. In The Silent Spring, Rachel Carson warns about global environmental collapse. The Esalen Institute is founded, our neighborhood, Big Sur. 1963, Martin Luther King has a dream on the steps of Lincoln Memorial. The Beatles release I Want to Hold Your Hand. President Kennedy is assassinated. In 1964, Stanley Kubrick releases Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Mom. Norbert Wiener publishes God and Gollum Incorporated, a comment on certain points where cybernetics impinges on religion. 1964. Alan Watts enters his 50s, experiencing, as he says in this order, the Zen boom, the beginning of Esalen, Kerouac, and Dharma bombs, the psychedelic adventure with Huxley, Ginsberg, Leary, Alpert, travels in the Orient, Mexico, Europe, Suzuki, Gary Snyder, the hippie uprising, communes, concern for ecology. In 1967, Watts had a starring role in The Human Being in Golden Gate Park. He was a major arrival. That's where Timothy Leary proclaimed to turn on to an end drop. Marshall McLuhan publishes The Medium is the Massage, stating this: the total field awareness engendered by electronic media is enabling us, indeed compelling us, to grope toward a consciousness of the unconscious. Marshall McLuhan. 1968, Kubrick releases Space Odyssey. Apollo 8 astronauts produced the first image of the Earth created by human beings in space. The Whole Earth catalog appears. Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy are assassinated. I graduate from high school. You're in the class of 60?
69.
The first Earth Day is observed in 1970. That spring, touring the US and Europe, Watts is in Evanston. I attend his lecture, and the next day, synchronicitously, he appears. I come upon the great trickster Coyote himself in the lounge of the university library, dressed with his sandals and socks, which was just plain weird for that day, smoking a tiny little cigarette and looking for all the world like the man at ease. So Alan Watts, right there. So I went up and I spoke to him. I told this story before. He was probably exhausted at that time. Not much later, I mailed him a paper referring to Gebser's structures of consciousness. I could have introduced Alan Watts to John Gebser. He wrote back and said, I'm keeping your paper. I find it interesting. But then in 1971, in a new edition to Behold the Spirit, Watts writes this: A Christianity which is not basically mystical must become either a political ideology or a mindless fundamentalism. 1971. A Christianity which is not basically mystical must become either a political ideology or a mindless fundamentalism. I graduated from Northwestern in 72. The U.S. concludes military activities in Vietnam in 73. The same year, Trungpa publishes Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism and moves forward to found the Naropa Institute. John Gaither dies. Alan Watts dies. As Sam Burkholz, founder of Shambhala Publications, recounts, when Rinpoche was in England, one of his favorite things was to read Alan Watts. Alan was one of Rinpoche's literary heroes. He went to meet him at his houseboat in Sausalito. This was a huge deal. They had a great time together, drinking and talking. They continued their friendship. Alan ended up spending the last day and night of his life with Trungpa Rinpoche. Rinpoche and Alan had apparently a wonderful time together, drinking, and then Alan went home and passed away in his sleep that morning. Al Chung Liang Huang says, Alan's journey to his own east had not been an easy one, for he was the kind of man who created traps for himself with his own words and had to maneuver his way out of them. He showed us how Eastern philosophy has been gradually permeating all walks of life in the West, while everyone laments the disappearance of the gentle East under increasing technological demands. The paradox priest, he called himself. A few weeks ago at Henry Milley Library in Big Sur, and his daughter was asked if her father was a Buddhist. She answered he did not consider himself a Buddhist. He didn't consider himself a practicing anything. He's talking about all that he's read and all that he knows. I wonder what that last night was like with What did they talk about? Was it prodigiously religious? A tea ceremony? I don't think so. Religio is not a set of concepts or abstractions, not interfaith dialogue, not the reconvening of the Parliament of World Religions. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Religio is an awareing of the sense symmetries and transpermeabilities, as Steve Rosen puts it, of our interconnectedness. Religio arises with what Gebser calls Urvertrauen, primordial trust, which is actually paired with Angst, primordial fear. Religio binds us and always has banded us together, with or without our awareness of the truth or consequences. Gebser, in Transparency, the spiritual comes to perception. Origin is present, prodigious. In truth, we are the whole, and the whole wears us. And so it is, sisters, those that we find ourselves here at Naropa University in Boulder, Colorado, in October of 2018. Another image from 1967, the medium is the Masonic, two-page spread. You'll notice the Buddhist monk who is self-immolating. And the quote above, which you cannot make out, the West shall shake, the East awake, while ye have the night for morn. James Joyce. Well, it's 2018, the East be woke, the West be shaken. China's economy will be larger than America's in 2030. India's will be bigger than America's by 2050, if not sooner. These new truths are self-evident. We have 12 years to limit the climate catastrophe. News this week, off that screen, Incheon, South Korea, a landmark report from the United Nations Scientific Panel on Climate Change paints a far more dire picture of the immediate consequences of climate change than previously thought, and says that avoiding the damage requires transforming the world economy at a speed and scale that has no documented historic precedent. The report issued this last Monday, by the Intergovernmental Panel, a group of scientists convened by the United Nations to guide world leaders, describes a world of worsening food shortages, wildfires, mass die-offs, mass extinctions, as soon as 2040, well within the lifetime of many people we are living. So there it is. I sent a report to Jeff Keel, who's sitting right there, a few weeks ago when I was in Seattle, where the air was so infused with smoke that there were warnings to stay off the streets of Seattle. You remember what it was like. So Jeff responded to me this way. He said, I question the sanity of anyone who is not alarmed or even terrified by what is happening. To be fearless in the midst of being terrified, that is what climate change requires of us. Not an easy task, to be sure, but as Trump would say, it is workable. It's Jeff's quote. Then Jeff sent me this image. Cacolithophorus. This microscopic plankton in the ocean, Jeff tells me, takes CO2 from the atmosphere, plays an important role in climate. Jeff says this is a beautiful image of multi-dimensional mandala consciousness arising from nature. Amen. Sometimes I catch myself moving too fast. Months pass like weeks used to pass. Seasons, lifetimes, death times. I must meditate to channel the energies. Slow time. One more time in 1957. The last page of the medium is the massage. Alfred North Whitehead. It is the business of the future to be dangerous. I feel intimate and deep kinship with Alan Watts. He says, the only way to make sense out of change is to plunge into it, move with it, and join the dance. A genuine faith, he called himself. But he never faked genuineness. Certainly he never played holier than thou. Gaither says, every endeavor regarding the spiritual is a daring venture. It would not be such a venture if we knew what the spiritual ultimately is. We may have beliefs about this, but we cannot know. Perhaps the unplumbable sorrow that can be called a basic component of creaturehood, and therefore of the human being, is rooted in this fact. However, only a person who has learned how to smile can know it. Smile of Asia, what's the title? Smiling is a reflection of the spiritual, the great riddle of the human face. Tear. Joy is the most infallible sign of the presence of God. Gaither directs our attention to this angel at the Cathedral of Reims. Trungpa Rinpoche, there is no fixed doctrine of anything, no kind of exemplary case history of what should be, no manual, no dictionary of what should take place in the universe. Things don't happen according to our conceptualized expectations. There could be eternally terrifying things. All kinds of things might happen. The dawn of Tantra. In her book, The Red Thread, Susan Murphy of the Zen Circle in Sydney writes, we come to realization just as we are. Messy, murky, failing, laughing, loving, and torn. She cites Alice Walker. If you are prepared to go right down completely through yourself, you come up inside all people. I see archetypal dynamics, archetypal power. This is our wheelhouse. I hear Job. The Almighty has terrified me. Jesus says, love God with all your heart and soul and mind and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Upon these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. Rama Krishna. Mother likes people who play. She loves the game. She's keeping the game going. She loves those who are willing to risk everything. Rumi. Show me a soul willing to be thrown in the fire. Howard Thurman, the mentor of Martin Luther King. Don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive. And go to it. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive. Gabesher says over and over, we make things happen, and we must let things happen. Generations now living are witnessing magnitudes of change, of scale and dimension, a spiritual transformation without precedent in human experience. The wind bloweth where it listeth, and thou hearest the sound thereof, but canst not tell from whence it cometh or whither it goeth. So it is of everyone born of the Spirit. We are profoundly implicated in the orders and disorders of each other's lives. We are in this together with all the little children of the world, grandchildren, middle schoolers, high schoolers, time travelers, all the way. Here is your cross of tenderness. Jack Carroll in the hallway. Take a look. Urgent changes are needed. Meditate and take action. It's okay to have differing postures for unselfish prayer. We are born, we live, we love, we long, we suffer, and we do what we can. We give what we must, and we die. 1 John 4:18. Good sermons. Blessed be the tie that binds our hearts in Christian love. What bliss to be alive together here in the Rockies. With the running water, the prairie dogs right outside our window, with raven, hummingbird, rainbow trout, chipmunk, beaver, ponderosa, aspen, lichen unto the lichen, the mystical body, sacrament of the present moment, diaphanon, seeing through. Here we go. Namaste. Gasho. Woo!